Welcome to the Qasim Rashid Show, a civil rights lawyer here to expose all forms of injustice with a sprinkling of dad jokes in between. Here's your host, Qasim Rashid.
Good morning and peace be upon you wherever you're tuning in from. My name is Qasim Rashid and this is the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. The election is here. The 2024 election is upon us, and I know it's cliche to say this at every single election, but it's the most consequential election, blah, blah, blah. It's true still, and so we need to say it. And what's at stake is effectively whether we have a democracy after Tuesday or not. And I firmly believe that. I've read Project 2025 cover to cover, all 900 pages. It was excruciatingly painful. One, because it's just asinine and fascist, and two, because these people don't know how to actually write. And maybe once we win this election, we can give them writing lessons. But more importantly, right now, I cannot emphasize how critical it is that you get out there and vote. And today's show is really about that. I have four amazing thought leaders in this space representing four very different parts of our democracy, kind of like the Captain Planet team of democracy, let's call it that. And I want to have a really candid and detailed conversation about what's going on, about what we're facing, because at the end of the day, until and unless we understand what is at stake, we're not going to take the necessary actions to be successful in this space. I'm going to start by welcoming somebody that I've known actually only for a few months now, but I'm so impressed with her work. Pari is one of the nation's leading experts in reproductive health. She's worked in public health for the better part of 2 decades. She is one of the brilliant minds behind Gemma Consulting. Pari and Eve is her partner. And the reason why I'm having her on is because I'm recording this from Atlanta, Georgia, where she is, well, she's from Toronto, but she's in Atlanta, Georgia now. And Georgia, as you know, was a state that we won by 11,581 votes or something like that. Pari can correct me momentarily if I'm wrong. And she's working in healthcare here in a swing state that is system critical to Kamala Harris winning, to Democrats winning. Pari, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks.
You know, one thing I try to focus on in this show is bring on the folks that have been doing the work. It's easy to kind of talk the talk, but you walk the walk as well. Let's talk about the state of reproductive health in Georgia right now. If I'm not mistaken, there's a 6-week abortion ban, which is being contested in the courts on some levels, but it looks like it's going to stick around for the time being. Where are we right now in Georgia?
Yeah, so that's right. So in 2019, Georgia was the very first state to institute what we call an abortion ban. They used the 6-week case law language to set what then became a precedent for other states to use. Because they did it in 2019, before Roe fell, there was still a federal provision that protected abortion access nationally. And so the reason they went with 6 weeks is because they federally were not allowed to go lower than that. And so what happened was that the ACLU challenged the Georgia case, so it didn't actually go into effect until about 2022, which is why I think a lot of people don't realize that Georgia was actually the very first state to make something like that happen. So at present, in October of 2024, abortion is legal in Georgia up until 6 weeks, which of course any reasonable person would tell you is before most women even know that they're pregnant.
That's right.
It was recently stayed by a Georgia judge who said that the 6-week ban was unconstitutional. But in typical Georgia fashion, 1 week later, another court undid that ruling. So actually, in fact, we are now back at having only a 6-week allowance for healthcare in Georgia.
We were at a documentary film screening the other day called No One Asked You. Fantastic documentary about the 50-year-long plan by right-wing Republicans to repeal reproductive health care access, abortion access. And as I was walking out, a young woman recognized me from social media and asked me about her personal health care. And she asked a question that I deferred to you, and I'd love for you to talk about this as well. She asked a really significant and important question. She said, I had a miscarriage at 9 weeks when I lived in a different state. If that happens to me here, what am I facing? Am I facing dying? What's going to happen to me?
The sad answer is that the possibility is yes. It's not a straightforward yes or no because it greatly depends on the health provider that you have. And I say that simply because there are some health providers that recognize that reproductive health care is a right. And so even though they are not allowed to provide you that care themselves within Georgia, they tend to help you access it elsewhere. Having said that, Georgia is also one of the first few states to criminalize women for miscarriages.
Wow.
And for folks who are saying or think that that doesn't happen, in the last 6 months alone, we have seen 3 active cases that are now under litigation where women were reported on for having miscarriages by healthcare staff at the hospitals that they eventually showed up to after miscarrying. They were reported to the police. The police investigated and are now criminally prosecuting them for miscarriages. Because the law does not allow for criminal prosecution of a miscarriage itself, they use what are called accompanying laws to charge these women with things like, for example, inappropriate discarding of human remains or things like that. And I say that the law was not designed for this because actively in the last 2 years, the GOP has been rewriting state laws to allow for criminal prosecution of which are actually just regular bodily functions. So to answer that, the woman's question is if she had a miscarriage at 9 weeks in Georgia, it would greatly depend on who her care provider was, what care she was able to access, whether she was able to naturally expel or whether she needed medical intervention. Because as we've seen in the recent ProPublica report that was released in September, women are actively showing up in hospital emergency rooms, in parking lots, and are being denied care after either undergoing miscarriages or having the abortion pill undergo complications. And so it would really, unfortunately, there is a possibility that they could suffer. Just today, actually, in Texas, we heard of another woman who had unfortunately was denied care because the hospital refused to treat her after she had fetal remains that were still inside of her. And by the time they decided that it was inappropriate for them to treat her, it was too late and she
died from sepsis.
Yeah.
And this is, I want to emphasize to folks listening, this is happening right now, even before a potential Trump administration. And if what we're seeing happening in these states, the 14 states that have banned abortion or restricted it heavily, if this is expanded to all 50 states with a national ban, which is what they want, you're going to see an exponential increase in maternal and infant mortality. Northwestern University just did a study that it's already doubled over the last decade and spiked after Roe was overturned. And I guess I have 2 questions. One, you mentioned that it was the healthcare workers that reported these women. Doesn't HIPAA apply? Isn't there a healthcare privacy obligation that they have? How is that not overruling this really draconian move to publicize or criminalize a woman's private healthcare needs?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I'm glad you brought that up because many people don't understand that HIPAA does not apply in this case. The reason it does not is because, first of all, what we need to know is that Roe v. Wade did not actually protect the right to an abortion. It protected the right to medical privacy.
Right.
And so when it fell in 2022, along with it, so did a lot of medical protections, not just for reproductive health care, but for all sorts of things. And so now, because of that Dobbs decision that took place that then undid Roe, HIPAA does not apply to cases where there is a provisional or a statewide law that deems something criminal.
Wow.
Or deems something illegal.
Incredible.
And I think people don't understand this because for so many years they've been taught about HIPAA as this overarching piece of legislation, but HIPAA is actively being dismantled by these federal laws that are now being enacted. I also want to emphasize, I think what some people might not understand is that the medication that is known as, like, colloquially known as the abortion pill,
mifepristone,
is 2 pills. So it's mifepristone and misoprostol.
Yeah.
And those 2 pills are the exact same pills that are used for miscarriage management. So when you say that you are having a miscarriage versus when you are having an abortion, there is literally no
Same thing.
medical
Yeah.
differentiation between those two things. In fact, they are actually classified under the same medical classification on your medical records.
That's right.
So to criminalize a pill for one purpose is to criminalize its use for
Every
anything.
purpose. That's right.
And so there is no distinction between limiting or criminalizing abortion and limiting and criminalizing miscarriage management.
And I think that's an important point to make, because you often hear even right-wing conservatives say, well, I'm anti-abortion, but for miscarriages, we should make exceptions. Well, it's the same effective thing. It's the same practical thing. And if you really want to get into the nuances and split hairs, that's where you have a medical professional do that, not a politician sitting in Washington. I said I had two questions. Second question is fundamentally this: what's the closing message for folks who, I don't think there's anyone on the fence. At this point, if you're on the fence, then I just think you're being not honest with yourself, because there's two very different candidates. I think the question really is whether someone is going to vote or not. What is your closing message to ensure folks recognize the need of the moment, the urgency of the moment, and get out and vote?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that I truly feel like this election is one where not just reproductive health, but every aspect of our lives are at stake. And I'll provide an example of what I mean by that. Oftentimes, when you hear politicians talk about women's healthcare or reproductive healthcare, they only talk about abortion as if it is this singular thing rather than being part of a healthcare ecosystem, right? The truth is that the same states that are criminalizing and banning abortion are also the same states that are banning birth control. They are coming after IVF. They are the same states that have abstinence-only sex education curriculums. So they have the highest rates of teen pregnancy. They also have the highest rates of intimate partner violence. And so basically, to say that abortion is one thing is to show a fundamental misunderstanding of how human healthcare works.
That's right.
Because it's also the same states that are not supporting families with family leave or with childcare or with maternity leave. There's no investment in the infrastructure that's required to actually have happy, healthy families. So truly, it is just about control. And we're seeing this in every aspect of the GOP's policies. It's not just about abortion. It's not just about immigration. It's about being able to control what people's everyday lives look like. And that's why I think that voting is so critical in this election, because there isn't a single person anymore who remains unaffected. To say that an issue is just political is to not understand what it means to live in America.
You're exactly right. It is about control, and that's why we call it fascism, because you should not have government controlling these private, intimate matters that should be between a person, their family, their physician. Pari, thank you so much for being with us. Before you go, how can folks find you on social media? How can they support your work and your advocacy?
Yeah, of course. It was so wonderful to be here. Eve and I are on all platforms: Instagram, TikTok, X, Threads, and YouTube.
We call it Twitter on this
Twitter.
show. Okay, just making sure.
At Gemma, GEMMA_talks, TALKS.
Gemma Talks. Pari, thank you so much for being with us. Hope to have you back soon.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. When we come back, we're speaking with Ayana Gay, a young Black activist in the state of Florida, which, my God, I don't know why anybody would want to live in Florida right now, but Ayana will answer that question for us. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126. Pari is with pariandeve.com. Check out that website. They're doing phenomenal work in protecting healthcare access and just in general giving advocacy on good healthcare policy that saves lives. I'm excited to welcome our next guest. Ayana Gay is a young Black activist, poet, writer in Florida. And I wanted to bring her on because she's been doing the work on the ground to ensure that we're maximizing voter turnout among young people, among Black voters, and hopefully finding a way to flip Florida blue again eventually. I've long said I don't think Florida is a red state. I know Florida is a voter suppression state, and we see that with the horrific Jim Crow, white supremacist policies enacted by Ron DeSantis. But I'm grateful to have Ayana with us today. Ayana, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, one of the things I want to talk to you about was the youth vote. What's interesting about Gen Z or young millennials, older Gen Z especially, there is a growing restlessness. I think part of that is due to climate change. Part of that is due to the sheer cost of starting a family, buying a home. And so restlessness is kind of a kind way of saying furious rage to burn it all down. And I think you feel that. Talk to me about that. What are young people feeling in this election? Where are their heads at? What's working, what's not working?
I think it's a mix between a restlessness and almost a hopelessness. I think a lot of young voters, especially younger millennials, we've been sold a dream. We've been sold a dream. We've been told that if you do X, Y, and Z, it will get you, a certain result. And we're realizing that we've inherited a problem that we did not create, and something that it would be extremely difficult to reverse. So when I say that, I mean like climate change. Climate change is something that, we've only been on the earth for so long.
Yeah.
And it's something that it's a problem that we've inherited and that will take a long time to reverse. And people aren't as like intentional about doing their part when it comes to like just the housing crisis. I think Zillow came out with like this commercial the other day where they were trying to tell young people that, oh, the way for young people to acquire home ownership is to go in with your friends on buying a home. And it's like, whose dream was that?
My God.
Whose dream was that? Whose dream was that? And that's not the dream you told us was attainable for us.
Yeah.
And it's just this like the goalpost is moving.
Yes.
And you're telling us that, you're giving us these roundabout dreams now, but it's not what we were told, and it's also not what we know is possible. You're giving us a cutout portion of what is possible.
Yeah.
And I think young voters are just not satisfied with that. We're aware that there is so much possibility because we've seen it, but because at the end of the day, anything we think it can actually come to fruition. And people are just frustrated. People are frustrated.
And the tone deafness of that kind of an ad, of going on it with your friends, like you're buying, like tickets to a game or something, or you're splitting a bill at a restaurant. Like, this is my home. I don't want to share my home with four other people. I want to share with my family, right? And you're right that this is not the deal that was promised to young people.
Right.
And when you think about just the shift in wealth and income inequality over the last 40 years, especially, there's a great study, horrifying study by the Rand Corporation that concludes that more than $50 trillion in wealth has been redistributed from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. So you want to talk about how they're like, oh, well, you just want socialism and you want redistribution. Well, it's already happening in the other way. And that is what class warfare is all about. They talk about, well, why aren't young people having kids anymore?
Right.
Because it costs $60,000 to have a child, let alone raise a child. And the minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour. So who do young people look to for inspiration? Who are your driving thought leaders in this space? You feel like this person gets it, and maybe if we rally around them. I know I hit you hard with that question because I feel like sometimes it's hard to find that. But maybe the different way to ask the same question is, where do you find inspiration or hope to keep moving on?
I think there's a way that we can look at the past, some of the past things that have happened and seeing how civic engagement, things like that actually work. When you think about like the Voters Act of 1965, and like, okay, at some point, in the late 1800s, Black men were given the right to vote, but then it was a right, but then they made it inaccessible.
It wasn't, yeah, exactly.
It wasn't easy. It became extremely difficult and it became dangerous. And so when you think about that, you get to the voting rights of 1965, and then you have, where they're saying that, okay, you can no longer allow literacy tests. You can no longer allow poll taxes. So we have seen like areas where we're working towards one goal and people think it's like a blanket thing, but there will also be barriers and people trying to stop you along the way. And we see how like things do take time. But so we can look to the past and see like evidence of like eventually your hard work pays off. Eventually the seeds you sow will reap a harvest or reap something. And so I think young people are motivated by that, but also motivated by each other. I think there's a lot of young people looking at young people, especially with the, social media, with TikTok, with Instagram, with all these like platforms in which we can share ideas and we can like spark just even a thought in other people. We're like, you know what? You're right. I watch a video all the time. I can watch a video and easily be like, wow, I never thought of that. Let me now figure out how I can be a part of this movement, this change, this, anything. And I think we are like being motivated by each other, and we're also making sure that we hold each other up and still know how to like balance the challenges of like what is possible versus what is probable.
Sure.
And working within those confinements as well, even though it's discouraging at times. But if we can get to what's probable in the race of getting to what's possible, we'll take it. Because
That's right.
At this point, that's what we're trying to do.
It's recognizing the long game. Yeah.
Yes, the long game.
And that can be difficult because when you're drowning right now, you can't wait 4 to 6 weeks for the raft to come. You need it immediately. And that's where I think it's important to lift each other up. I might ask you to drop some spoken word poetry a little bit later, if you feel comfortable. But let me shift first to your thoughts on Black voter turnout. We were at a Michelle Obama rally a couple of days ago. I was excited to see the young people and the energy that young people were bringing to the table. Obviously, Georgia is going to flip blue or not based on Black voter turnout. And here's why I don't like saying that, because unfortunately, white voters have always voted majority Republican every single time in every single election. I mean, that's just the way it is. And I don't feel like there's enough pressure put on left-leaning white people to say, come get your family, get your spouse, get your sibling, get your racist uncle, and tell them enough is enough. You need to vote in a way that's going to actually economically benefit. But we know that Black women in particular saved Georgia in 2020. Everyone remembers January 6th. People forget that Black women saved Georgia and the entire democracy on January 5th. And how reflective, how appropriate a metaphor of America that Black women saved democracy and got zero credit because it was overshadowed by white supremacy the very next day.
Yep.
Talk to me about Black youth turnout. What are you feeling? What are you seeing? What should we know?
I would say the Black youth, they are motivated. They are motivated to vote. I think they're more engaged, like we talked about earlier, in like some of the happenings right now. We're talking climate change. We're talking genocide. We're talking the housing crisis. We're talking, the lack of rent stabilization and things like that. I think we are motivated to just realize the quite literal trap we are in and how damaging it is to our futures. I think Black voters are, in a large part, motivated, but I do understand and I am aware that there are a lot of Black voters who feel as though they are not going to be considered. And consideration is a huge thing for us, because I think, especially considering the history of like just how Black people have been treated in America, but also the way in which we advocate for ourselves, we advocate for other people. Black women specifically are usually at the front lines of many social justice movements. And so, it's kind of this idea of like, at some point, who's going to stand up for us? Who's going to look out for us? And I mean, to an extent, there's this weight that we carry of, us carrying ourselves, which we have done. But I think there's a bit of frustration in the Black community of like, okay, at what point do we actually benefit from everything that we're fighting for? We talk about like, and this is not to like silo us or make us like, separate, but it's like, there's multiple things that have happened in the Black community, whereas when it happens in another community, there are immediate actions that take place. Black people have been getting harassed just for being Black all the time. And then when there was an uptick in like, Asian attacks in New York City specifically, then it was immediately a bill about about
anti-Asian hate.
And so it's like, wait. Yes. And like, yes,
That's
they
right.
deserve that. And where is our bill? but it doesn't look to people as if we've been targeted against, because it's actually just ingrained into the American
That's right.
fabric, and that is what is expected. But now that other people are getting mistreated or discriminated against, that's not the usual. But because we're part of the usual, because we're part of the historical context of America, it is overlooked, and it is, it is just normal.
That's so beautifully and painfully said. I can see the pain in your eyes as you say that. There's this, it shouldn't be a debate. Unfortunately, it's a debate because you've got enough ignorant people trying to make it a debate, that should we recognize racism as a public health crisis? And there's no debate. It absolutely is. Black infant mortality is 300% white infant and white maternal mortality. That doesn't happen by accident. The achievement gap between Black students and white students has stayed at 20%. That's not by accident. Black children are not less intelligent than white children. Exactly. It's about access and resources. EdTech had a study come out that said that Black and Latino majority schools receive 20 billion less in funding every single year than white majority schools. You tell me how you're going to survive or even stay up to speed with 20 billion less in resources. Exactly. And to your point, and I say this as an Asian American, as a human rights lawyer who works in this space closely, I was fascinated with how quickly the anti-Asian hate crime bill steamrolled through. Yep. But when we talk about a lynching bill, an anti-lynching bill, it was filibustered. It was blocked. Yeah. It turned down over and over and over again. And even to this day, the claim that racism exists is, well, you're just an anti-white racist. It's just, we're making up terms that don't exist to justify a white supremacy system that shouldn't exist in the first place.
Exactly. Yep.
Let me come back to the spoken word poetry. Can I put you on the spot? I'd love to hear it if you feel comfortable.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Stage is yours.
Okay. I'm trying to think what field are you going for? What field do you think?
I want you to be you, whatever you feel is comfortable, is right, that feels right, that hits your soul, that you feel people need to hear, that they should hear. I want you to be you and put it out there. I think poetry is it's one of the most beautiful things in the world, because I think it allows people to connect their soul to every soul out there. And the greatest poets are the ones who are able to do that in an effective way. So whatever works for you, whatever hits your chord right now is what I want to hear.
So I have this poem. It's called The Cookout. And it's a poem that I actually did on TikTok. And of course it was flagged for violation.
Wow.
It was flagged for violation multiple times because it recounts the history of what it means, what America's initial definition of the picnic was. And it goes into that detailing very graphically, and people became uncomfortable with that. And I'm like, if you're uncomfortable, imagine how uncomfortable
That's right.
we are to know the history. Imagine how uncomfortable the victims of it were to go through it. And people act like, it's so far-fetched. And it's like, no, we are descendants of these people who have been brutally harmed and violated. And so this is that poem. And the gist of it is essentially that I do genuinely believe that Black people deserve time, an opportunity to commune amongst ourselves, free of spaces with people who have the power to oppress us. And when people heard this, they were like, "Oh, you're pro-segregation." And it's just like, you know what? Sometimes in certain spaces. And people are dense, so they then take that and they hear what they want to hear. But this is that poem, so I kind of want to
Well, I can promise you it will not be censored here, and I want you to be your authentic self, and I'm just gonna shut up and I'm gonna listen.
Okay. It is time to stop inviting white people to the cookout for the bare minimum, for any reason at all. Did you forget the history of their picnic? How our bodies became their delicacy? A Southern comfort tradition, the searing of our skin, falling off the bone, burned, baked, and barbecued till the white meat showed how we hung, roped over fire pits, glazed eyes, and well done. Did you forget your seat was never at their table? That your only contribution was consumption, a casualty to be devoured and swallowed whole, how they set our ancestors ablaze, Black bodies dismembered and deboned, how America made ritual of this kind of roast, yet refuses to digest her own history. Rather wash her hands of the blood and call that a cleansing. The cookout is not for everyone. How it is okay for something to just be ours, a commemoration of our survival, a celebration of our surviving, a feast of Black congregation and fellowship, of aluminum foil and finger foods. We are allowed to exist in a space full of ourselves. We are owed this freedom. That is that poem.
Wow. I'm just trying to soak that in for a second. And I see your point that you're trying to make here, that that's actually I would respectfully offer that it's not even about segregation. It's about how do we ensure our physical and mental safety
Absolutely.
in a time where it's so difficult.
And I kept telling people, in the comments, because I'm not always trying to be combative. Sometimes I'm really seeking for you to understand
That's right.
me. And I kept telling people, a space is only as safe as the least safe person in that space. And so there are spaces in which we could all be together, but the least safe person in that space is how safe that space is actually going to be. And in terms of Black and white, quite literally, when people are in spaces with other people who have just quite literally the power, the societal power, the economic power, the historical power to oppress us, sometimes we do not want to be in that space. And I definitely want people to understand that more than anything, and just understand that it's okay. It's okay. And how we were talking about earlier, I want white people to actually have space with themselves and their family members to call their family members and talk about certain things, or to even just commune with each other. That is not racist, right? Because it's necessary for us to sometimes sit with people who are like us specifically for that reason, so we can learn from each other, so we can challenge each other and things like that.
Well, I would actually frame it as,
and even love each other, just love them.
Yeah, I would frame it as, this is the difference between being not racist versus anti-racist. That when you're anti-racist, and I'm talking to our white brothers and sisters specifically, when you're anti-racist, you're working to dismantle the systems of racism. You're not just sitting idle and saying, well, I think racism is bad. Well, you don't get a cookie for just saying that. We need the effort and the partnership to actively dismantle the systems of oppression. And if that means that you take the lead and speak into your family members and saying, hey, this is fundamentally wrong, and here's why you need to stop, you're most capable of delivering that message as opposed to anybody else. Because you have access in the ways that Black and brown people do not have access in those particular situations. Ayanna, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. How can folks find you? How can they support you on social media? Where can they get involved with your work and advocacy?
It was great being here. Also, you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter at Untouchable, the way in which it is naturally spelled, Untouchable Yan, Yann, which is the 4 middle letters of my name, Ayanna.
Ayanna Gay, thank you so much for being with us today. When we come back, I'm going to be speaking with somebody else I deeply admire, Russell Ellis. You know him as Jolly Good Ginger on TikTok. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. You're listening to the Qasim Rashid Show here on Sirius XM Urban View Channel 126, the most awesome show in the multiverse. That was Ayanna Gay. I'm inspired by her words, her spoken word poetry, her activism, and I'm hopeful for the future and the next generation because we have young leaders who are unafraid and unapologetic in speaking truth to power. As we close out the show, I'm excited to welcome our final guest for the day. You know him as Jolly Good Ginger on social media, where he has 5-6 million social media followers at least. But what's more impressive about him is the content he produces focus on anti-racism. Jolly is the kind of guy who uses his white male privilege to educate, to activate, to inform, and does it with pure comedy and a ton of compassion. Jolly, thank you for being with us today.
Hey, Qasim, thanks for having me, man. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
You bring, I think at first I remember seeing you on social media was this white dude with red hair and an epic beard. And I know you won't get offended when I say this because you know where I'm coming from. I was like, this guy looks like a MAGA Trump supporter.
Sure.
Like the quintessential textbook dictionary definition of it. But not only are you quite the opposite, but I love the way you leverage your privilege to talk about these issues, because there are folks out there who will not listen to me or a Black person or a Latino person, but they'll listen to you because you've got the complexion for protection, as they say. Talk about your journey. What's your superhero origin story to say, hey, listen, I'm going to use my voice and not to speak up for the voiceless, because I think I can't stand that phrase, by the way. You do it to elevate marginalized voices, and then you add to their voices with your own experience. I talk about that.
Well, I guess to kind of correct one thing, I'm not really the opposite. I am the quintessential MAGA white guy from rural white America down south. I am that. I just chose to reject the ideologies that was taught to me from that. I grow my beard out because I think my beard adds to the look. The reason we know, there's two reasons that we know the story of Achilles. It's because the Achilles heel is a great story, but also the story of Troy and the Trojan horse. And I think that the power of the story of the Trojan horse is being able to get behind the enemy's walls and get past the enemy's barriers, and then winning the battle once inside. And I think that in this battle of white supremacy, I am the Trojan horse. I will look like you. I know how you think. I know the words to say to get past your barriers, to get past your walls, to get through the front gate. But once inside, I'm then going to challenge every single thing that you believe, because that is my origin story. My origin story is being taught these conservative ideologies, being taught hate and bigotry, learning it from the pulpit of Christianity, learning it from my parents, learning it from the world around me, my school, my environment, my community, learning all of that, and then unlearning it all.
And let's talk about that. Like, what was the linchpin where you're like, I need to unlearn this and I need to be deliberate about it? You know, we talked earlier in the show about being not very racist versus being anti-racist. How did you make that transition? And I ask this in the context of our white allies out there who see members of their family and friends who have capitulated to the MAGA cult. And, you know, I don't believe anyone's fundamentally evil. I think there's a lot of good, genuine people out there who are conservatives, and they may not have had access to the information that you had or access to someone like you. So what's the message to other white Americans out there who see people they care about falling into this, you know, MAGA ideology, and they want to lift them up in a meaningful and consequential way?
I mean, for me, the linchpin was relationships. Something I don't talk about too much on my platform, but my mom and dad divorced when I was 3 years old. My mom remarried to a Black man. My mom was your quintessential racist woman. My dad was very much your quintessential racist man from the mountains of North Carolina. My dad ran with white supremacists. Where I live was essentially a sundown town. If you were there after dark, you got ran out of town or worse. And my dad was part of that crew, and my mom married him. So let's not give her a free pass. But she did then go on to marry a Black man, and it began the deconstruction of her own racism. And when I was 10 years old, I met my mom for the first time. And I met my siblings for the first time. At the time, I had 3 siblings. They were, you know, they were biracial. They were Black and white. But in my world of white supremacy, they were Black.
Yeah.
And where my mom lived was a Black neighborhood. And I was exposed to this relationship, to this other side of the fence that I had been told was A, B, C, X, Y, Z. But upon experiencing it firsthand, it was none of that. And I had a choice to make at a very, very young age. At the age of 10, I had the choice to make. Do I believe what daddy told me, or do I believe what I see with my own eyes?
Wow.
And I think that relationships play a large part in the deconstruction of bigotry, but not everybody has the benefit of those relationships. And so the other side of that is confronting bigotry head on. And that's been a big part of my message on social media is, you know, I gave a TED talk a couple of years back in which I talked about, I think the 3 steps to defeating white supremacy is educate, eradicate, and participate. That being, educate yourself on what white supremacy is. Growing up white, we're told that racism looks like this. It looks like a a guy in the middle of the street screaming the N-word. It looks like a guy burning a cross in the front yard. But that's not racism. That's the extreme end of racism, but it's not all that racism is. So educate yourself on what racism looks like.
That's right.
And once you know what it looks like, you'll be able to identify it. And then you'll be able to do step 2, and that's eradicate. Eradicate it from your circles, from your community, from your school, from your work, more importantly, from your church, where I learned a lot of bigotry.
Right.
And then once you start that eradication process, also participate. That's step 3. Participate in your local government and your state government and your federal government. Those are 3 levels of government you can get very active in and use your white privilege and put power to your privilege and say, hey, the Black and brown community, the Black indigenous people of color community, they're not very well represented in these ideas, or they're not well represented in this financial plan, or they're not well represented in this housing plan, and use your privilege to speak up for those communities and demand diversity, equity, and inclusion in the circles around you. That is the baseline of what anti-racism looks like. And I think, this is my firm belief, that as a white person raised in America, you are inherently and continuously racist, which is why you're required to be anti-racist.
I want to double down on this really important point you made earlier, that white supremacy is not just a dude wearing a KKK hood burning a cross. That's one manifestation of it. But as Dr. Michelle Alexander talks about in the new Jim Crow, it manifests in every aspect of our lives. It's why crack had a prison sentence of 100 times that of cocaine, because crack was predominantly used by Black Americans, cocaine mostly by white Americans. It's why Black Americans and white Americans convicted of the same crime, Black Americans got a 20% longer prison sentence on average. That's why 50% of the exonerees on death row are Black, because Black Americans are more than twice as likely to be wrongfully convicted of a crime they didn't commit and given the death penalty. This is all manifestations of white supremacy. And guess what? It also manifests in everyday life. Let's talk for a minute about economic justice, because I know this is an area you've worked extensively on. You've worked on raising funds for organizations that work on racial justice initiatives. You know, there's a statistic that most people think I'm making up because it's so staggering, that the median wealth for a Black family, not income, I'm talking about wealth. You take up all their assets and all their debts, you put it together, for a Black family versus a white family. For a white family, it's about $150,000. For a Black family, it's about $3,000. And this is the legacy of Jim Crow and the perpetual denial of basic justice. This is what white supremacy, manifested looks like. What success are you seeing in our policies and in our conversations? And more, I think, directly with the election right here, what's going to happen if Trump is elected to these statistics that we're looking at right now?
So there's a lot that we could dive into there. We could dive into the fact that 22% of Black America lives in poverty and only 9% of white America lives in poverty. That's 1 in 4 Black families versus 1 in 10 white families. That is here's what drives me crazy about white people. They deny this economic, division. They deny this economic gap. They deny it, but it's right in front of your face. How is it possible that 1 in 10 white families are in poverty versus 1 in 4 Black families? And keep in mind, when we talk about 1 in 4, 1 in 10, that's a ratio. So it already takes into account the population difference.
Right.
It has nothing to do with that. So what is it, just because Black people hate money? Is it just that Black people love poverty? Is it just that Black people are lazy? No, it's a very clear and evident present day tangential evidence of racism and white supremacy. The idea, white Americans love to talk about we're in a post-racial America or a post-racism America or a post-white supremacy. We're very clearly not, or else those numbers would be equal. It would be 1 in 4 or 1 in 10 on both sides, not one or the other. And so when we look at these numbers, that's very clear evidence of white supremacy still existing. So we could have a long 3-hour conversation on why that still is.
Yeah.
It's one thing to say in 1964 that we are ending white supremacy, that we are having equal right. You can have all those conversations, but when white America owns all the property, what does that look like in terms of equity?
That's right.
I think equity is the key to the whole thing. And what's funny is that was Dr. King's message. When you go to school now, white people are taught that Dr. King's message was that of equality, and it was. But it was equality and then equity, and they cut that part off because white America killed him and then controlled the message. Equality without equity is words without action. And I think that what we still don't see this many years later, what we still don't see this many years after the Civil Rights Act, is that push towards equity. You listen to the Republicans and what they're fighting against. What they're fighting against is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because the fact is, we want to talk about equality. We don't want to be about equality.
That's right.
Because equality looks like equity. So what does the second Trump term look like? Very easy. Making America great again. Again is a word that references the past. Going back in the past. Going back into a time where white people owned the majority of the property, where white people were the benefactors of the system, where black people capitulated to white America, and where the power center was within white America. That's what it looks like. Going forward looks like equity.
And I want to double down on this point too, Jolly, because whenever you ask, what does the again in MAGA refer to? They can never give you a time period. They can never honestly give you a point in American history, because whatever point they give you, they are implicitly, explicitly admitting that they were perfectly okay with this massive demographic of American society not having fundamental rights. You want to go back to 1973, before the Equal Credit Opportunity Act was passed and women couldn't have financial autonomy? Okay, so you're telling me that women should not have the basic right of financial independence. You want to go back to 1963, before the Civil Rights Acts were passed. You're telling me that Black people don't deserve basic access to civil rights in this country, and you're telling me that Asians don't have the right, or shouldn't have the right, to immigrate to this country. You want to go back to before Brown v. Board. You want to, resegregate schools. So again, if you haven't figured it out by now, is a clear call to white supremacy. It shouldn't be make America great again. It should make white supremacy great again, because that's the only fundamental reality definition of that term. Jolly, we spent the last week or so in Georgia. We'll close it out with this in these last 4 minutes that we have, knocking doors, trying to do whatever we can to ensure that Trump does not win Georgia. What are you seeing at the doors? What are you seeing talking to folks? You went to a Trump rally and a Michelle Obama rally. I think that's got to be a record. And you've been out knocking doors. What are you seeing on the ground here?
I think that Georgia as a swing state represents every other state. I think that, when I get in these communities and knock on these doors, I did it in Arizona, I did it in Pennsylvania, I did it in Virginia. This is the fourth state that I've been knocking doors in just the last couple of months. And I think that I hear the same thing across the board. The top three things I hear is, I don't trust either candidate. Great, no problem. I don't need you to trust 100% of what everybody says. But I do need you to trust what they say, which brings me to point number two. And this is what I tell voters. Donald Trump has made it abundantly clear. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a dictator for a day only. I'm going to, if you vote for me this time, you never have to vote for me again. So what I see is dictatorship being basically told to
That's his pitch.
Verbatim. That's his pitch. And the number three thing I'm seeing is everyday Americans trying to find a way to relate to what's being told to them. I talked to Georgians just this week, and they a lot at the Trump rally. You said I went to the Trump rally. I did. And a lot of the guys at the Trump rally said, hey, illegal immigration is the top of my concern. And I asked them, how is that affecting you here in Georgia? And 100% of the people I asked said, it's not. And so they're trying to find a way to relate to the message that's being given to them without realizing the irony of it is it doesn't relate to you
at all.
And so what's really on the ballot this November, what's really on the ballot in 6 days, what's really on the ballot on November 5th is whether or not you want this experiment of American democracy to continue. I don't need you to agree with everything Kamala Harris says. I don't even need you to like Kamala Harris. All I need you to like is democracy, representative democracy, because Donald Trump said he's going to be a dictator on day one. Donald Trump says he is going to absolve the power of the legislative and judicial branch into the executive branch and be the single voice of America. Donald Trump said that he doesn't care what America thinks, feels, or wants. He's going to do what he wants. And that's quite fitting for a guy who was born into the top 1%.
You're right.
A guy who never has lived the life you and I live. A guy who's never worried about a paycheck or a bill. He's never seen either one. A guy who has never, ever, ever walked in your shoes, will never, ever relate to what we're going through. What's on the ballot next week is whether or not you want to vote in 2028 or not.
Jolly, thank you so much for being with us. How can folks find you on social media?
Jolly_good_ginger on all platforms.
Thanks for being with us today. My friends, we're down to our last couple minutes, and here's my final pitch to you. At the end of the day, you will not find a perfect candidate. You will find candidates that you vehemently disagree with and have horrible policy differences with. You know how critical I've been of the Biden-Harris administration on a number of things, including the genocide going on in Palestine. Fundamentally, this is about what Jolly just said. Do we want to have a chance at having a democracy on November 6th or not? That's fundamentally what this comes down to. And that requires us to be active, to be organized, and to ensure that our voices are heard. People died for our right to vote. People are dying right now for our right to vote, for our right to ensure that we can petition the government. We've got a man who's running to be a dictator. He's already gotten complete immunity from the Supreme Court and complete complicitness from legacy media and every Republican in Congress. Putting this man back in power all but ensures that we lose this experiment of a democracy and we hurtle towards fascism. If you don't believe me, go read Project 2025 yourself and go read what other folks have written about it. Make sure you vote. This is our last opportunity, and pull friends with you. Bring your circle of influence with you. I promise you, you will not regret voting. You will regret being silent at this critical moment in American history. Thank you all for tuning in. I deeply appreciate the advocacy, the trust that each of you bring to the table. And that is my commitment and promise to you, to continue to speak truth to power, to continue to uphold a sense of justice and humanity. Be sure to follow us on social media at Qasim Rashid across all platforms. If you're listening on Substack, make sure you hit that subscribe button so we can continue to create this advocacy and this content. We've got a great show lined up for next week. Hopefully we still have a functioning democracy, but you control that. Go out, vote. Much love to you all. Until next week, peace.